All right, we're recording. Kayla, this is so weird for me.
Why? Why?
Like I've been doing this for a minute, but like this feels so much more like legit.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you're my first guest in actual space,
Which is dope.
new mics, new
You on
thing.
the come up.
But we trying. I'm trying
You
to get
him. You're right. You can say I'm Harla. You him. You know what I mean? Himmy. You know.
hear me. No, but I appreciate you. So this is kind of a this is kind of a double like exciting one new space,
Yeah.
new podcast, not new podcast, but new podcast like space environment, but also the Des Moines second My City My Health
Yeah, it's huge.
conference. So walk me through for those that don't know, My City My Health is a health equity conference series where the goal is to have a major health equity conference in every city in the country. That's the mission for My City My Health that me and Larry established from day one. But this was the first like real health equity conference in Des Moines, and you were a part of the mental health panel.
Yeah.
So tell
Thank
me,
you for that.
yeah, of course. Tell me about your experience and what that meant to you of having that conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. It was one, it was beautiful. If I could just even take a step back, talk about going into the conference. I don't think
Talk
I've
about
ever
it.
been in a conference, like, a professional conference where I walk in, the vibes are there. Where it's like the music that's playing, the people, the community, and it's like the way you did it, and I loved where it was at. Everybody was kind of closer together. It
Yeah.
didn't feel like so spread out. So there was connection, there was like culture, and there was like authenticity, and I love that. So when I walked in, I was like, oh, I feel comfortable. I feel at home. Like, it's like sometimes you sit on a panel, you're
Right.
like, okay, I gotta, not necessarily change or code switch, but I gotta feel like I gotta bring a little oomph. But I feel
Right.
like, oh, I'm talking to my people, which is like my city, right?
Yes.
I'm talking about stuff I already know. So I felt relaxed. It felt good just to talk about things and have the questions that people don't often ask, related to our population. So I loved it, and I felt like it was just a space I could just be me and just talk about something
Yeah.
important.
You know what, Kayla? I recognize that too. That people were asking questions that in my mind I'm thinking in another space you probably wouldn't have asked that question. You know what I mean? That probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
But in that space, I think one, you, Brienne, and my boy Tim, the energy you guys were giving to the audience allowed that. I allowed that back and forth. Like, hey, this
Yeah.
is. But I feel like you guys have that power anyway because you're therapists. That's what you were born with that. That's what you do.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's been the most popular,
Oh, cool.
most asked for
Wow.
to bring back. So of course we're going to bring it back, and you're back at it again for the
Yes.
second time.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's on your chest right now? Well, let me take a step back because I have a lot different viewers. A lot of people who may not know you,
Yeah.
and I know you're not your therapist. You're not therapist, period, but you're a therapist. And
Yes.
so tell people a little bit
Yeah.
about yourself, what you're doing, and
Right.
what's your passion.
Absolutely. So, licensed mental health counselor in the state of Iowa. It's important to know I'm also a Black lesbian woman that just embodies everything about me. I love to kick it in shoes, sneakers. That's where Corey and I vibe.
Hey,
I got them today.
I made sure I got to bring the
Right.
dunks today.
And I like gold jewelry. I'm from Florida. Like, I like to bring swagger to the profession of mental health. And I like to destigmatize
That
it.
part.
That's from me walking in the door. I'm also director of the Drake Counseling Center, so that's where I primarily am. So I get to focus on mental health, needs across the entire campus. So doing mental health equity, that's like what I do every single day, is how do we think about and ensure that every person has access to these services in a safe and intentional and inclusive way. That goes through my mind. I
Right.
live for that. And I'm constantly going to have a job related to that, because that's like thinking, intention for like 4,500 people. Wow. But I love that because I want to destigmatize, and I want to ensure like people have access to mental health, even if it's not therapy. So that's why I love this with like, a panel. That's access. Everybody might not sit on a couch or a chair or virtual session, but
That's
they
real.
should have access to that. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And I also, since the last time, actually, I opened up my own little business.
Yeah, talk about it.
So I own my own LLC. It's called Question Kayla. That's also a platform of like my social media. And I don't know if I ever told you like where I got the name from. Is I like to ask a lot of questions, and it was actually kids making fun of me like when I was a freshman in high school, because when the teacher says who has a question, my hand was up. Like I always was curious. I wanted to know something, so they said, oh, there's Question Kayla. And I realized that's not a bad thing. I have a lot of questions, but I also want to, help answer questions. So that's where that platform came from. But I have presentations, trainings. Eventually, I might open up consultations. Let's just see what my capacity is like. But that's my give back, right? So I do things for nonprofits, any space I can, but also other spaces to ensure people have access to the material, related to mental health. So
that's so dope, and I know we always say this. That's like it's so needed. I hear that a lot. Yeah. That's so great, and it's so needed. And yeah, we know it's needed. But my question is, okay, we understand mental health. What you're doing should never go out of style, right? How do we reach the people? And this is one question that I hope comes up or gets talked about at the conference this year. But there's somebody that is struggling and for whatever reason won't seek help. Maybe they can't. Maybe there's an insurance issue. And you kind of touched on that during the documentary that we're filming. But like, how do we get to the people?
Yeah, I would say first step, which is something that's my goal in the next year, is we have to go to the people. So it's kind of like if we're hearing from an aside, like people are saying this, but we're hearing it from other people, then we're never really connecting. So there's like a gap, and that gap can be financial, that gap can be, location, but I don't think we're actually in the community like that in outside of a professional way. So if it's like there are people, I hear from pastors say, oh, this person's struggling in the church. Oh, we should be there, right? How do we actually go to that? And then, that's the issue with capitalism and all that. We got to make change and all of that. But at the same time, the communities that we're really trying to help may not even have the means to get into our doors. Right. So it's less about how do we open up our doors somewhere people can go, but more like how do we knock on the people's doors that may not even know how to reach us.
Yeah. And there are so many things. This is funny, not around mental health. Maybe it's kind of similar to mental health, because as a health coach, I try to stay, there's a fine line between coaching and therapy. And I don't cross that line at all. I'm not trying to get sued out here for nothing.
Right.
But I have a helping heart, so it's hard for me, but I know my limitations. But what comes up a lot within my spaces are anxiety around food. And what I'm realizing, especially in the health coaching space, even when I was a younger health coach, and people would tell me that like, oh, this is how I grew up, I just can't, this is how I'm still eating. I saw it as an excuse as a young, immature health coach, like, here's the same old excuse, this is how you ate when you were younger. But there's something to past trauma, past anxieties that show up as an adult that were there as a child. That I had a patient today that she really wants to change. And she wants this goal of eating healthier and going to the gym, but she gets anxiety because she had stints of homelessness. So whenever rent's due, she gets anxious. She has the money, but it's this anxiety. So then she starts to eat whatever's in the way. Right? And it's like, man, we can't even talk about, okay, what healthy foods you need to add to your diet or getting cardiovascular activity. Because when the 28th, 29th come around, you're bugging out. And I can't even fault you. Kayla, I'm like,
it's fair.
You were homeless for years. I can't even be mad at you. So, and how, in your work, how do you work with that? Like, how do you, and they really, really want to change, but they're not looking at the things that happened to them 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Absolutely, yeah. So a lot of people come to therapy or they come to like coaching or this next step in life using a part of their brain that's very different than the one in the past, right? So it's like I use my maybe more mature, developed brain that knows I have these resources, but there's a whole brain that we have that lives in our gut that also lives in like a different part of our brain where it stores memories, experiences that aren't there yet. So what happens is people are having this internal tug of war where there's a part of them that's just like, I am safe now, I am okay now, but they're moving here. A harder treatment is we need to move backwards, which feels so weird, right? How do you, why would I go backwards? What's the idea? It's almost like you're leaving your parts behind. There are parts of you that haven't got the chance to experience the healing, that haven't got the chance to experience that safety, financial security. And because you're just moving here, if you don't turn back and actually go back and let these parts of you know that where you're at now, listen to the needs that they still have, those fears, validate that, and also reassure it, you're going to find yourself keep having these hiccups around that time because they're just like, yeah, I know you're saying all this, but this is all I remember. My brain is like, I remember not having money. I remember being afraid. And this thing that's happening right now, rent, that reminds me of that. And I feel stuck there. So we have to get yourself unstuck by going back and relieving the pain that's there.
Right. So is that where your inner child work comes from?
Yes. Absolutely. I love inner child work. The moment you mentioned, you're like, oh, she has a little girl. This is what she experienced. I'm like, yes, because think about a child's mind. They're just like in panic. They're like, I don't know how to do this for myself. I can't do this for myself. I got to figure out whatever way to make me feel good in that moment. But as an adult, you're like, no, I have these resources. A child doesn't know that. So internally in inner child work is we go back and we have to listen to what is that inner child communicating? What is it still holding on to? What does that heaviness look like? And then from where you're at today, from the core part of yourself, how can you then start to relieve some of that? Can we validate that? So if my inner child is saying something like, I'm really afraid if I go to the gym, I won't have money anymore. Instead of me saying, I don't need to worry about that, which is our gut response, like, let me forget, validate that. It makes sense for me to be worried about that because X, Y, and Z. And at the same time, here are some ways I can take care of myself in case I ever worry about finances again.
Right.
You know, so that's the way you kind of navigate. But it can be a difficult process because you have to sit with some like really overwhelming emotions.
Yeah. And that's the key word. You got to sit with that joint.
Yes.
Not a lot of people trying to sit
at all, period. I'm not going to sugarcoat nothing. It's not like, kumbaya feels good. No, you're going to feel some things. But that's the power in doing it with somebody else. Is you won't feel that stuff by yourself. And I think that's what makes people afraid is because when they did feel that, often they were isolated, alone. So if they feel it again, it's going to trigger that.
Right.
So that's the power in doing that in a relationship.
No, that's real. You know, something that was brought up, again, you know, you're my go-to mental health correspondent. I feel like I'm MSNBC or some joint.
right. Give my credit. I'll take it. You make it, I make it.
Yeah. For real. And during the documentary that we're filming, I brought up policy and how that affects mental health, services and things like that. And I'm starting to realize health equity and policy go together. I separated them for a while because in my mind, policy and politics were the same. And I'm like, I'm not rocking with that. But policy and advocacy, what I'm recognizing is not, you can't separate them. And there are a lot of social injustices around mental health that are happening. And what are your thoughts on that? What are some of your frustrations around that, or what are some things that we can do? And I'm hoping this conversation comes up at the conference. I really am, because the more I get into health equity, the work, and start like researching and reading and starting to study it more, policies are trash. Yeah. Around all aspects, not just mental health, but you being in that space and seeing it firsthand, how policy is affecting how people get your services or whatever the case may be. What are your thoughts on that, and how do we go forward?
Absolutely, yeah. So when you think of social justice, I want to eliminate the barriers, right, that perpetuate these issues. And so if I'm working with someone who is significantly poor, houseless, I can't sit here and teach you mindfulness skills. And I think that's what happens in our profession. That part, it's like, let's teach you how to breathe. Let's teach you how to regulate. How am I going to teach you how to regulate when you go home and you don't know where you're going to sleep? you don't know where your next meal is going to be. So a lot of that approaches, these policies is how do we change the structure and the climate so that way people have access to that. That would make my job 10 times easier if they didn't have to worry and I'd have to worry where your next meal is going to be. If you have enough clothes to last the week. And that's the real talk of like what we're experiencing in our field, right? Even just things that, I work in a college setting about you gonna get that hold in your account, like I know you want to talk about this childhood trauma here, but at the same time you are panicking. You don't know if you're gonna be able to afford your education.
That email is real.
I was listen. I know because I was looking at my old email and said, "Wow." But if we don't have, we don't think about that stuff. We're missing it. And I'm not one to help people become complacent in their pain just for the sake of doing therapy. That doesn't make sense. Right. And there's not any long-term progress. So when we think about policies, it's really looking at what kind of barriers is policy going to create for people, not only getting access, but sustainable healthcare. And I think that's what sometimes is missing. And so we're making policy. I mean, we're seeing it right now in Iowa. The legislation's a hot mess. And that's something I personally have to deal with when I counsel someone who's coming in because they are distressed and they need an abortion, but they're terrified of not knowing what to do. I'm not going to sit here and say, let's deep breathe. I mean, in regulation, but that's a Band-Aid. Like, there's a real life situation that's happening. How do we actually get you to the resources that you need overall? And what kind of hoops do we have to jump through? And that's the role of, like, how do you help people do that? But also, how do you dismantle the system and have advocacy so that way there's less hoops people have to jump through before they can even actually process the things that they have going on?
Yeah, I got to let that soak in a little bit. That's
and I say it because I don't know what time you gonna air this, but on July 11th, by the time people see this, we're gonna have new laws. Because Governor Reynolds just called something, to do July 11th to talk about banning abortion fully. So these are things that are gonna impact people, and we have to have conversations about that. Right,
and it's not just impacting them whether they're in that situation, but now it's it's a long-term effect.
Yes.
Because it's compounded. That happens. Now they have that stress. Yeah. Now other stresses in their life are building up. It's just one thing after another. Yeah. And it's feeling like not me personally, but I know from what I've been told from people that I work with outside of work that people are getting fed up.
They are.
Fed up.
About 3 things happened last week, so you think about banning DEI or affirmative action, LGBTQ. It's so many things. It's almost like when you think about policies and we think about social justice trauma, it's like removing the rights. People feel trapped. They feel like there's nothing they can do, and that triggers fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like all these different trauma responses. And then you don't find the chance to regulate, right? You don't ever get to catch your breath. And so when we think about policies, it's like maybe before people were like, okay, I'm just going to allow things to happen. And majority of people, because there are people who are always impacted. But when you feel that, you see that, it's heightened all the time, your body never gets the chance to regulate. And then if your body's never in a state of regulation, all these past experiences, right? You're easily triggered, easily irritable, overwhelmed, not really sure what to do. And then therapy, you come in and you're kind of seeking that, fix me, right?
Right.
But you're not broken. Right, it's like we're in a system. You're having, honestly, a typical response to a dysregulated society, and then we're figuring out how do we then fix you, rather than fixing like you mentioned policies, procedures, the structure. And if we're only focused on one and the other, then we're going to consistently have polarization, dysregulation across the board.
Right, and then you have people already thinking it's them and not even thinking about their situation or their environment that someone else is impacting.
Exactly. And then that's across the board what I see with suicide prevention. It's me, it's my fault. And if I believe it's my fault, and that's the only way I can change is to change me. Sometimes we do see situations where people say, if I just remove myself, then there won't be a problem anymore.
Right.
And that's what can happen.
Can we dig into that? Can we talk about suicide a little bit? I know it sounds crazy when I say that, but
not to me, because I talk about it all the time.
I know you talk about it all the time. And I don't remember if it was a YouTube video or Instagram reel or something. 'Cause I know you out here in these social streets, but it was somewhere that you were talking about really passionately about how we don't talk about suicide, especially in communities of people of color.
Yeah, we don't.
I have a few ideas of why, but I want to get your point of view of why do you think that specifically. Mental health is on one level, but we talk about suicide.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what we say. That's that white people. That's white people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Dang.
I think we as a community, especially the Black community, I see it a lot in like the Latinx community as well, indigenous populations, even though there are really high rates there. We pride ourselves on overcoming. We pride ourselves on resiliency. I remember driving in the car, my mom said, we can overcome slavery, we can overcome anything, right? That uplifts us as a community. But what happens when we feel like we can't overcome this?
Right.
There isn't this other, right? It's never, we can overcome anything.
Right.
And if we can't, we go to community, we get support. It's like, if we can't, we're weak. There's something wrong with you. And like all these messages, and that point, that layer of protection, that shield of protection of overcoming resilience, when you feel beaten down, we go inward. And then we really hold the burden of all of those messages that have happened, all the things and all the pain, to the only way you can see. Our brain is primed to protect us. It's primed to alleviate pain. So at that point, when you were so overwhelmed, that is the only way. Many people see it's like, that's the only escape I can have. Nothing else will help me. And when we're talking about racially marginalized groups, it's not like not trying, right? So then you're dealing with the system. Someone says, okay, go get help here. I get that help. That's not helping. I'm experiencing barrier after barrier after barrier, scrutiny. What happens? And the reason we don't talk about it is, I think, because a lot of us are in pain. And again, we just have faith, right? A lot of our communities are rooted in faith, and you're not praying hard enough. So again, if you're not doing well, it's because there's something you're not doing, because we can't think about that. Because I think a lot of times if we think about it, it just swallows us. I think we become anxious, and we're like, I can't think about the bad stuff, the negative stuff happening in the world. I just got to keep my eye on the future.
That's real. You know, when I think for me, I feel like if someone were to approach me about the situation like that, I automatically going to feel like I need to have the answer for them.
Yeah.
How can someone be an ally or supportive?
Absolutely.
When someone does, that is a leap of faith and bravery to say, hey, I've thought about, or I've attempted, or I have a plan, or whatever the case may be. How do we equip somebody to handle that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because what we started doing at Drake, myself and another professor, Greg Lango, we started offering these free, what we call QPR trainings, which is question, persuade, refer. And it's a suicide prevention, kind of like gatekeeper training. So it's kind of giving emotional mental health emergency CPR. Not PR, whatever you would call that.
Right.
Where the idea is it equips people of like, okay, what do you do? What are the warning signs? And then what can you do? So one step I would say, getting trained in that, you can reach out to me, through Drake. We've trained some folks at CFI. The hope is to get that out there, and it's free. It's 1 hour.
Oh, that's dope.
Just getting the education, because a lot of people don't have the education. And even if someone approaches saying, hey, I'm really struggling, that's an opportunity to prevent something, to intervene. But if you don't know what the signs are, it's going to be really hard. So I would say get in that training. You can just Google QPR trainings, and you can have it.
I'll make sure I have the link in the description of this episode and on the YouTube.
And it'll give you trainers who are all local as well. We got 3 other new trainers at Drake too, so that's a great opportunity.
Right.
I would say starting with knowing the warning signs might be a good first step. So that way because there are a lot of warning signs out there. I unfortunately think about suicide more often than I should, because I see the warning signs in so many people.
Right.
So when they're talking to me, I'm like, and I see if you're thinking about it, there's a high chance they already are. Like, I want to dispel that myth. Like, you can't place a thought in someone's head like that. No. So if you're thinking about it, it's okay to ask. The worst thing they'll say is like, nah, I'm not thinking about that. Like, a lot of times people think like, oh, they'll get angry. That's not the case. Those are a lot of myths. If someone gets angry, underneath anger is a lot of pain, right? So sometimes that's just a natural response to fear. There's a lot of stigma related to it, and it can be scary, right? Talking about that. So we want to just open the door for it. And I would say another thing is just, letting someone know you're there for them, that you don't judge them. Because unfortunately, a lot of people's initial response is, oh, it's not that bad. Like, you'll be all right. That puts judgment on someone. That makes them feel like, there's something wrong with me for thinking this way.
Or you're going to look at me differently now. Every time I see you, or it's not going to be the same.
Absolutely.
All those things.
Just interrupt that by saying, I don't see you any differently. I feel even more connected to you.
Word.
That you told me this. And like, I'm happy. I'm here for you to talk about this more, right? Keep the door open, and then just follow up with someone.
Right. No, that's real. I appreciate that.
Oh, last I was saying 988 line. That's new. There's a new suicide talk line. It used to be 1-800, a lot of numbers, but no one really remembers all those numbers. 988.
That's
call.
Smart.
Yeah, just, right? Yes. Yeah. You just call. Have someone you can get connected. I've had to call for some people before. You can get connected to someone who can help, process that in that moment.
Right. So let's talk about the swag for a minute, because if I were to say to some random person, what does a therapist look like?
Oh, yes. Cardigan.
They are not wearing Jordans.
They are not.
They're not rocking the socks. They're not looking like is this on purpose? Is this just how this the new school of therapists right now? I know this is you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So why is it important for you to show up like this and also have somebody in your chair, that's not typically that looks like a therapist?
Absolutely, yeah, because the populations that I pride myself in working
with. You do got cardigan go. I come out with it. You do got one. I saw it on TikTok. I was
like, oh, you got me. It's rare. I think I have like 3 cardigans. That's it. So I have my days, but the populations that I pride myself in working on, which is predominantly, Black, Indigenous, folks of color, and LGBTQ communities. You're not going to want to go talk to someone if you don't feel like you can relate to them.
That part.
I think it starts with like how you show up. And during my day, I dress professional and things like that, but the swagger is still there, right?
Word.
My personality is still there. And I think what happens is when people enter the workforce, you're going to enter the image that you think you should look like. So even counselors, right? Even folks that are Black counselors, queer counselors, whatever, will still think, oh, this is what a counselor looks like. But it doesn't include them. And there haven't been a lot of us. There's like 4%, of Black clinicians that, that are therapists, and 1% of Black men. So you're already coming in with a very small perspective of people that look like you, that act like you, and a lot that don't. So for me, when I came, I said it's very important that I always show up as myself. And it happened also when I used to work with kids, like adolescents, and they gravitated to me so much because of that. When I wore my afro, they felt seen. When I wore my shoes, they felt seen, connected. So that's bigger than me just sitting in an office talking.
Word.
You need to feel seen, connected, and heard in ways that I can't just verbally state.
Right.
So for me, I was like, I'd much rather, and when I feel good, because I think like, I'm like, I think it's more important that we show up, so we can create those spaces and be more authentic. Because if I'm not authentic showing up, working with you, how can I help you get to authenticity, even in this space?
That's real. That's real. And I love it. I think I have, early in my career, health coaching career, I felt like I had to look a certain way because I was seen as a provider. So I had to put on these titles, church shoes. I'm like, this ain't it.
Right.
This is not me.
Yes. And that's actually building on that. When I really started wearing sneakers, is I saw the way a group of often white clinicians, providers dress when they dress comfortably. I see those sneakers. I'm like, why do I get to wear those sneakers? So I can't wear my sneakers and we can wear those white Nikes? Absolutely. So then I realized that's a culture thing. Like your relax looks like that. In my culture, relax looks like this.
Yes.
So it's okay for me to insert that. And I was like, when I'm not, I'm embodying white supremacy within myself, saying I have to act a certain way to connect with you.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Because the knowledge is still there. You still talking that
Period.
talk.
Yes.
Period.
So I realized I was like, oh.
Right.
And if you pay attention, there's a certain way people dress when they're relaxed. I'm like, oh, this is just culture. Like, you don't have to wear no moccasins and Sperry's. Like, no, I can wear my Jordans and my Air Max. And I felt relaxed ever since then. I was like, who can check me? Because I'm coming with the same knowledge.
Exactly.
I am. I'm still the same person.
Exactly.
It's just, this is what I look like when I'm relaxed, and that's what you look like when you're relaxed.
That's dope. So I know I got 5 minutes with you. I'm going to be mindful of your time. But getting back to My City, My Health, what are you looking forward to this year? What are some of the conversations that you feel like we should bring up within that panel? It's going to be you again. Brianne's going to be there. My guy Gabe Martinez is the other panelist. Teresa Zilk is the moderator. So I'm super excited for that panel again. I think it's going to be dope. what are you looking forward to? What kind of conversations are you wanting to have?
Absolutely, yeah. One, I'm really looking forward to just the vibe. Just not often I get to show up in a space. Actually, next time I might wear my sneakers. Now that, just like where I get to just show up as myself with people I already connect with and have a authentic conversation around mental health and not feel anything in my mind that says you got to talk a certain way, you got to be a certain way. Like, I love that. I'm also thinking that we need to have more conversations about early prevention. So talking about our children, talking about life as children, because I think there are a lot of adults out there as well that kind of don't realize the things that happen to them as a child are still impacting them. And the things that are happening to our children now have the potential to impact them. And so I think if there's a way for us to cultivate that conversation, that can be really helpful, especially around trauma, self-esteem, just like generational trauma, all these different pieces. And then how do we overcome that? Because I think that's where we're at a lot of ways. Because I think a lot of people now are like, okay, now I know I got some problems. I go to therapy. What do I do with that? What's the next step? And I think I'm really looking forward to hearing from the community on what they want from us. So I know it's a lot of us giving them, but if they're like, hey, we need more of this, or we see that, like, I'm going to therapy, but I need more help outside of it, that would actually help me personally to figure out, okay, what kind of groups do I need to start figuring out how to give back to the community? Right.
That leads to an idea that I have. I'm going to talk to you about it once we cut. But because last year, we blocked 45 minutes per panel. 45 minutes for a panel. I want to say 15 minutes for Q&A, or 45 minutes total. And it was not long enough. It was not. It was not long enough. So it's still going to be the same format, but I have some ideas I want to get your thoughts on.
Absolutely.
But Kayla Bell-Consolver, thank you so much.
Hit me. We're having a new thing. Hit me and her.
Hey, I appreciate you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It's an honor. It's an honor.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh, I didn't even say the Healthy Project podcast. This whole thing.
Now you got your chance.
Look, thank y'all for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I'll holler at you next time.
All right.